Uh, Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Min. I'm the Business Development Director at CO3. I have the honour of introducing tonight's session, after which I'll be leaving you in the capable hands of CO3's Member Services Manager, Suzanne Courtney. So let me offer you the warmest of welcomes from our offices in the heart of Belfast to this, our webinar titled Navigating the New Code of Fundraising Practice and Learning from Complaints. This session has been made possible through our colleagues at the Fundraising Regulator, and so the warmest of our welcomes are directed to our two facilitators tonight from the Fundraising Regulator. Priya Warner is the Head of Policy at the Fundraising Regulator. She has worked in regulation for the last 15 years and specifically on policy development for over a decade. She leads on developing the Fundraising Regulator's regulatory standards, its policy development and its research. Catherine Orr is the Fundraising Regulator's Head of Casework, having previously worked with the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman after a career in social work. You're both very welcome, Priya and Catherine. Just before handing over to them, just a quick reminder that if you have any questions to type them in the question box. Let us know if you'd like your question directed to Priya or Catherine. We'll then try to address those during the question and answer phase of the presentation tonight, before Suzanne Courtney then wraps things up for us at the end. If you have any technical difficulties tonight, we have CO3's Johnny Bell on standby on a mobile phone number, if you have that to hand, 0772 750 527. That's 0772 750 527. And you'll see that number on the title page of the webinar as well. That's all from me. I'm going to pass over immediately to Priya Warner of the Fundraising Regulator.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to switch off our webcam and pull up the slides. So if you just hold on for me. Brilliant. Okay, so hopefully you can now see the slides that we have on screen. And I'm going to introduce our session with you this evening and talk to you about the work that we've been doing most recently on the Code of Fundraising Practice. So we're going to cover how to use the new code, how we've made the standards more accessible, and then I'll be passing over to Catherine, who will talk to you about our approach to handling complaints and some of the common code breaches that she sees through her work and how charities can learn from them. So just a bit of background, I'm sure you're all very familiar with ourselves as the Fundraising Regulator, but just to recap, so we obviously regulate all charitable fundraising in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So we set the standards that are expected for fundraising, and those standards are UK-wide, so they also include standard requirements for Scotland. But in Scotland, there is a slightly different model when it comes to handling complaints, and Catherine can mention that when she speaks to you later. So aside from setting standards, our other core functions are around investigating complaints about fundraising, providing people with more control over the communications that they receive, and we do that through the Fundraising Preference Service. And we also provide guidance and support. And that guidance and support comes through our inquiries line, where we can answer questions that you may have, but also through publishing guidance and information that will help you to meet the standards that we set in the code. So if we just reflect on what we think and consider the Code of Fundraising Practice to be about, it's really about setting consistent standards for fundraising. And that consistency of standards means that those standards would apply regardless of the type of fundraising that you're doing or where you're doing it. What it does is set out the expectations for organisations that are fundraising, so that you are clear and understand what is expected of you from ourselves as the Fundraising Regulator. Those standards are also then used by the organisation to consider complaints that it receives from members of the public. And underpinning the standards and the code are kind of four values really: respect, transparency, being trustworthy and operating legally and openly. And actually those principles underpin a lot of what the code talks about and what the code expects in terms of standards. So, as you may be aware, we inherited the Code of Fundraising Practice from the Institute of Fundraising. We then also inherited the rule books, as they were then, from the FRSB. And over the course of the last 3 years, as we've been doing work to make improvements on particular areas of the code, I think we were aware of and had had some feedback that actually there were a number of different places that you would need to go to if you wanted to know what standards were expected of you. Those standards would be set in the code, some of them were in the rule books, and then we had separate legal appendices. And I think we were very conscious that in setting expectations of standards that you are expected to meet, we needed to make it as easy as possible for you to know what those expectations were. And it wasn't necessarily easy for yourselves to have to go to various different documents to find out what you needed to be doing. So really, we were focused on reviewing the accessibility of the code. So we published a consultation during 2018, at the back end of 2018, where we consulted on our proposals. We had 116 responses to that consultation. And as a result of the responses, we did make some changes to our proposals. So we published a PDF of the code in June 2019, and it came into effect on the 1st of October of 2019, alongside kind of revamped part of the website in relation to the code. And I'll come on to talk to you a bit more about what we've done there. So as I said, this exercise was really around consolidating the code, the rule books and the legal appendices into one document. What we weren't doing was fundamentally changing the standards that were expected of you. So if you were used to the old code and you knew what the standards were there, what you'll find with the new code is that where they're found might be slightly different, the language that we've used may be different, but fundamentally we haven't changed our expectations of what you should be doing. What we hope is that you have a clearer navigation and a clearer structure for the code. We've done a lot of work to pull out the differences in law between England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, so that it's easier for you to know and see where those differences exist. And we did a lot of work with the Plain English campaign to make the language more accessible, clearer and easy to understand. So this is really the structure of the new code. One short introduction, and it is shorter than the one that we consulted on because feedback was the original draft was too long. Part one are the standards which apply to all fundraising. So regardless of the type and nature of fundraising your organisation is doing, you need to look at the standards in part one, which has 4 sections around behaviour, the responsibilities of those that govern organisations, so for example the trustees. Section 3 is around GDPR, and 4 is around handling and processing donations. So that's a core part of the code that everyone needs to read. Part 2 focuses on standards that will apply when you're working with others. So if you're working with volunteers or children or third parties, there are relevant standards for you to look at in that section. And finally, part 3, and those are the standards which will apply to specific fundraising methods. So if your organisation does legacy fundraising, you can look at section 15. If your organisation is doing door-to-door, you will look at the relevant section there. And so part 3 is more of a kind of pick which sections are relevant to your organisation. And finally, what's new is the introduction of a glossary, which summarises what we mean by key terms. So the code and the law. If you are familiar with the previous code, you will know that the asterisk was used to differentiate between standards based on the law and standards that weren't. We have removed the asterisks following feedback from the Plain English campaign and also feedback we received over the course of the work we were doing. So now, if you want to know which standards are based on a legal requirement, what you will want to do is look for standards that are bolded out with the must and must not. So we haven't removed the distinction, it's just that the distinction we make is slightly different. I think it's really important for us to be clear though, that this code isn't designed to be a legal handbook. So if you think of it as your one-stop shop for everything to do with the law that you need to comply with, the code doesn't do that. So there will be situations where you feel that you need to take your own legal advice and you are responsible for doing that. And equally, whilst we have made the distinction between standards based on law and standards based on our regulatory requirements, that's a useful distinction perhaps from your perspective, but when it comes to our complaints handling and our view of the standards, they are all equal. So on the right of this slide set, you will see an example of where we've bolded out a must or must not. This slide just gives you a really quick example of what the standard might have looked like previously. This one was 26 words, and what it looks like now. So the language is much more active, and we've effectively said the same thing, but in less words and more clearly. Terms like importune and denigrate that were in the previous code have been removed and replaced with clearer and easier to understand language. Each section of the code sets out who you means, because all of the standards have been turned into kind of you must. So you would be wondering who you is, and this is how it looks. So in the PDF, you're looking for a small information bubble, and online you've got the same kind of information bubble with some purple box outs. As I said, these are a number of other areas that we've done, and this is particularly to the code online, and I'm going to talk to you a bit more about those. So we have highlighted regional differences. Those regional differences you will see through a blue line running to the left of the standards. At the top of each page, you will see quick sharing links. So for those of you that are keen to, you can share on your Facebook page, on your LinkedIn. There's quick links for printing and sharing on email. In terms of navigating the code, you will have a sticky left-hand navigation if you're online, and that navigation will stay with you as you move around the code, so you can quickly jump from section to section if you need to. All of the glossary definitions are hyperlinked, so if you go to a standard online and that word has a glossary definition, you will see a small dotted line underneath. If you click on that, up will pop the glossary definition. And finally, to aid you, we have linked between relevant sections of the code where we think that's helpful, and we will also link to external guidance where there's helpful guidance by others. So what we hope in navigating the code online in particular is that we've made the document easier to use and move through. So in terms of applying the code, and I'm sure this is something that you will all be aware of, you must make sure that you meet the standards in the code, both those based on the law and those that we set as regulatory requirements. I'm sure that you all do this. It's important that when you're thinking about the standards and you're applying that to your fundraising practice, that if you are making difficult decisions or if you are making complex decisions, that you think through your justification, rationale and reasoning for those. And I think, again, sometimes there can be the view that fundraising is only for certain staff within organisations, but actually, given the context of the standards, what they talk about and the areas that they refer to, it is helpful for you to make all your staff and volunteers aware of the standards that are within the code, whilst obviously tailoring your training to the nature of the roles of the different people in your organisations. We've produced a mapping guide, and that guide at a top level will show you where earlier parts of the code, previous parts of the code now sit in the new code. And for more detail, we also have deletions and merges logs published on our website. I think in terms of putting the code into practice, we've got a few very key messages here. So as I say, this consultation and the changes we've made really were not focused on making fundamental changes to the code. Yes, we removed duplication, we removed overlap, we clarified terms through the glossary. So there really isn't a need, if you haven't already engaged with the code, for you to be panicking. Do take some time to digest the new code, look at the PDF, look at what we've done online. Think about whether any of your training materials, any of your policies or procedures need to be updated. So you may have some training materials which may refer to what were previous standards in the old code, and you might need to update those. Equally, your policies and procedures may currently refer to the code and the rule books and the legal appendices. Again, you may need to update those. Use this as an opportunity to highlight the important work that you're doing in relation to fundraising, talk to staff and volunteers about the changes, and use it as an opportunity to generally raise awareness of the standards that you're expected to meet. And as I mentioned at the beginning, contact us if you have inquiries. We are more than happy to help you and support you and answer your questions. You can contact us on email, you can phone us up. And as I said, we also do publish guidance on our website that you may find helpful. So I think in a quick summary, really, those are the key messages about the Code of Fundraising Practice. I'm having a quick look. I can't see at the moment that I've had any questions come in. So I will hand over to Catherine, and then I will keep an eye to see if I can see any questions coming in.
Thanks, Priya. Hi, good evening, everyone. So just to turn now to look at our complaints work, what I'm hoping to give you this evening is an overview of sort of the scale of our complaints work and our processes and some of the principles underlying those, and then to take a look at some of the themes emerging from our annual complaints report. So to first give you an idea of the scale of our complaints work, just a few basic figures. So between the 1st of April 2017 and the 31st of August 2018, we received just over 1,500 complaints. On any given day, we receive numerous complaints, and when we assess those and triage those, they fall broadly into one of three categories. So those that are out of remit, those that are not yet ready for us to consider, so what we would term as premature, and then those that are in remit and are ready for us to investigate, or sometimes take action short of an investigation. So out of the 1,504 complaints we received in 2017-18, 40% were out of remit, and in those cases we look to signpost the complainant to a more relevant organisation wherever possible, so that might be to the Charity Commission, to Action Fraud or Trading Standards. A further 44% were premature, by which we mean the complaint hadn't yet been put to the charity or organisation complained about, or they hadn't been given adequate time to respond. And then from the remaining 16% of complaints, we closed 78 investigations and upheld 81% of those, which translated into 63 investigations where we identified at least one breach of the code. Then to look at some of the principles underlying our process, what's really key for us as a message to get across to people is that we truly believe that complaints are a learning opportunity. So we're not out to punish charities or organisations, but we hope that they would see complaints in the same way, embrace them as a learning opportunity and as a chance to improve in terms of their compliance and the quality of the fundraising that they're doing. So we investigate complaints about fundraising where these cannot be resolved by the organisations themselves. And by that we mean local resolution is a really important principle for us. So we believe it's important that organisations have an opportunity to respond to complaints before we look at a case. And therefore, in all but exceptional circumstances, we will refer the complaint back to the charity if it hasn't yet been put to them. So as Priya said, the Code of Fundraising Practice sets out the standards we use when considering complaints. And again, we deal with complaints about fundraising in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And although, as Priya said, those standards do apply in Scotland, where fundraising is carried out by charities registered primarily in Scotland, then any complaints arising from that would be a matter for the Scottish Fundraising Standards Panel. Our service is free and can be used by anyone who believes they've been affected by poor fundraising practice. So once we take a look at a case and investigate, if we identify a breach of the code, we then make recommendations for improvement to the organisations concerned. And we may also make recommendations to provide the complainant with an appropriate remedy, usually by way of a written apology, should they want that. Complainants don't always want it. For example, if you had a complaint about unwanted contact from a charity against the individual's wishes, then they may not want any further contact from the organisation. We would respect that. Our decisions are final and there is no process of appeal. However, parties to the complaint may request an external review, and we've had the first two of these in recent months that we will publish information about on our website in due course. And another recent decision made by our board last year was to publish summaries of all our investigations, naming the organisations investigated. So the first batch of these was uploaded in September onto our website, and the next batch is due to be published in December. And the idea behind that, obviously, is it's a tool for the sector in terms of learning and seeing what we're investigating, and also we're aiming to be transparent about our work, what we're looking at, who we're looking at, what we're finding. All parties are provided with a copy of the investigation summary intended for publication when we issue our final investigation decision, and have 2 weeks to raise any concerns or comments about the content of that. So we would never publish anything about an organisation or charity without you seeing it first. Bear with me, we're just trying to click to the next slide. So looking at what we can investigate, first of all. In a nutshell, we investigate complaints where there is a possible breach of the code. And these are often broadly identified in a number of high-level ways, as set out in this slide, although this is by no means exhaustive. But it's things such as if a member of the public believes the fundraising organisation has made misleading or excessive requests for donations, if a member of the public believes the fundraising organisation has been disrespectful or treated them unfairly when seeking donations, if a fundraising organisation is not transparent or open about the relationship it has with a third party, for example, a fundraising agency working on its behalf, and if a fundraising organisation has failed to respect a donor or potential donors, which is, for example, if a donor is asked to be contacted only in a certain way, and then if a fundraising organisation has not dealt appropriately with a complaint made by a member of the public about fundraising. And I should say there, obviously, complaints aren't only brought to us by members of the public. They can, from time to time, be brought to us by another organisation. And then, obviously, before we investigate, we look at that complaint to ensure that there is a clear reason for it and we understand what that is. And it sounds obvious, but to establish that it definitely does relate directly to fundraising activity rather than any broader activities of the organisation. So then looking on the flip side of what we cannot investigate, or what we would decide or term as outside of our remit, that can include complaints about allegations of serious or sustained misconduct by those in management and control of a charity. That would be a matter for the Charity Commission, and we would signpost there. Complainants that an organisation is claiming to be a charity when it is not, including allegations of fraud or criminal activity, obviously that would be a police matter. Complaints about employment or contractual matters, either from a member of the public, an employee or third-party agency. Complaints that have already been brought to the attention of and are being investigated by the police. And we have discontinued several investigations in the past on that basis. And complaints where legal action is being taken. Turn now to look at some of the key themes from our complaints report. Our annual complaints report 2017-18 was published in spring 2019 and is available in full on our website. We are due to report on the 2018-19 data in the new year, so keep an eye out for that. But our annual complaints report offers insight into 2 key areas. So the first part of the report looks at the complaints we've received as a regulator, and the second part looks at the complaints that charities have reported to us. And for that part, we've gathered data from 58 charities who spend the most on fundraising. So they are all spending at least £5 million annually on fundraising. And although, therefore, that data is taken from that set of charities who are very large in their operations, we do believe it offers valuable learning and insight that's valuable to the entire sector. So to look at the second part first, which is the complaints reported to us by the sector. And I should say these 58 charities reported nearly 22,000 complaints in total. The top themes amongst these complaints were door-to-door fundraising, and within that, 31% of the time it was the behaviour of the fundraiser that the individual was concerned about, and in 24% of cases it was the time of the day of approach. The next theme was addressed mail, and within that 34% of the time it was the frequency of the communication, and in 13% of complaints it was the campaign content complained about. And then the last thing was clothing collections. And interestingly, the sector reported that 38% of the time, so in more cases than any others, the complaint was focused on bags not being collected, which is contrast with what we see, because almost always clothing collection complaints are about bags being delivered when they aren't wanted and against the householders' wishes. So there is full analysis insight available in our report online. We've gathered data from the sector in the same way for 2018-19, like I said, and we'll be reporting on that in the new year. At the moment, the same group of charities are collecting data in 1920 for us to report on, and then we will repeat the exercise in 2021 as well. So we'll be able to have a really useful comparable data set. So to look now at the complaints we've received as a regulator, the foremost complaint about themes for this period were misleading information, managing supporter data, monitoring third parties, and better complaints handling. And I'll drill down into each one of those now. So to look at misleading information, first of all, by this we mean where charities or organisations have presented information as part of their fundraising appeals and campaigns in a way that either may be exaggerating facts or misusing statistics or other information, and this has left the donor or potential donor feeling misled and unable to make an informed decision. So we found 25 breaches of the code on this point across 18 investigations. And as you'll be very aware, this is an important area, and members of the public do not enjoy feeling either manipulated or misled, and it does provoke a lot of concern from people. As a regulator, when we're assessing these complaints, it can be a difficult one to judge, and we do often find that there's been no intention on the part of the charity to mislead or misrepresent anything, but we do sometimes find that possibly more could have been done to ensure the information and data has been better presented. So I think the key takeaway here is to ensure that you really think about how you're using and presenting information, be really careful with that, consider statistics and their source, and what you're taking them to mean, and how you're linking that to your ask, and to try and create engagement with the public. The next theme then is monitoring of third parties, and this is an area where we found repeated breaches of the code by charities of varying sizes. I think the importance of the ability of charities to oversee and monitor third parties engaged in fundraising on their behalf can't be underestimated, as you'll all be very aware. Because as you know, as confident as you may be in your own systems and teams, can't forget these contractors working on your behalf. It is a risky area, whether that's a marketing agency, a fundraising agency, or a company used to collect or distribute bags. So some of the key tips here are looking at how you use your contract. So this is something, if we're investigating a complaint and it involves a third party, we will always look at the contract that was in place between the third party and the charity, and we will want to see that it had the appropriate provisions in place to allow the charity to effectively monitor the third party's actions, including their complaints handling. We will look to see that the contract makes mention of the code of fundraising practice in particular, along with other legal requirements. Another thing to think about here is whether the contractor is registered with us, because again, that's another way that they can show their compliance and their intention to comply with our standards. So looking next at managing personal data, this was a theme we found in 15 investigations and 19% of our total. And again, as you'll be very aware, this is an ongoing task for charities of all sizes to ensure they look after people's data, and is more important than ever. I think the most common complaint here is an obvious one, which is people not being removed from supporter databases when requested. We had a case where a complainant said they were being bombarded with appeals from a charity, contacted the charity and asked them to stop. The appeals continued, and one of the difficulties obviously here is it's not always immediate. Once somebody makes a request, it can take some time to stop mailings that are already in process, and the code does allow in part for that, and we're conscious of that. But if you get it wrong once and then somebody has to call it the second time, you may then inadvertently get it wrong almost a third time in their eyes, because you haven't been able to stop things in time, so it sort of compounds the original error. Also relevant here is our fundraising preference service. So this is a service you may be familiar with, which we run, and this allows individuals to control the communications they receive from named charities. And it is essential here, as in what we rather fundraising, that suppression requests are picked up in a really timely way and actioned appropriately. So this is really all about the systems that you have in place to ensure that your database is kept up to date and that actions are requests are actioned in a timely way. There is more good guidance, good practice guidance available here from the Information Commission's Office, and also some on our website that we've produced. And then finally, to look at the last theme, which is poor complaint handling. My favourite, as you wouldn't be surprised, and this is the most frequent code breach that we find, and obviously cuts across every other theme. And I think one of the important things here to kind of highlight is that complaints often end up with us because they haven't been handled correctly in the first place. And as you can imagine, if somebody approaches the charity with a complaint that they're quite annoyed about, if they then feel that complaint is mismanaged and they get a response that's very defensive or it doesn't cover all the points they've raised, and it has to be escalated to us, then by the time it gets to us, they won't just be quite annoyed anymore, they'll be really annoyed, and it's hard to bring it down from that position. So some of the things that we see in complaints handling that cause problems are inadequate responses, so it doesn't fully address all of the points of complaint, or a failure to demonstrate learning from a complaint. We do find sometimes that charities can be defensive in their tone, and we understand absolutely, of course, that the people who work or volunteer for charities are often very passionate about the cause and their work, but it is important, as far as possible, to be open to complaints, try not to take them personally, and as I've said previously, to embrace them as an opportunity to learn and improve. And clearly, to enable you to do this effectively, you need to have appropriate systems in place. In the cases of some smaller charities, we see it does seem that the failure to properly deal with complaints is linked to resource. That said, we've certainly seen examples of poor complaint handling in larger charities as well. So regardless of your size, you do need the procedures and systems in place to protect your organisation and keep. So just a few things to pull out then in terms of how to improve your complaint handling and get that right going forward. The first point is just to ensure that all your staff understand what a complaint is and how to recognise one. As you'll know, complaints don't always come neatly packaged up as labelled as a complaint. Our definition is that a complaint may be generally defined as an expression of dissatisfaction, however that's made, about actions taken or a lack of action. So whatever form that comes into your organisation as, if you can see that somebody is clearly unhappy about something, then we would expect you to recognise that and treat that as a complaint, even if they don't say something like, I'm writing to complain. As I mentioned, you need to have effective processes and procedures in place. It is actually part of the code, a requirement that you do have a publicly available complaints process, and this should be simple and clear. And then obviously in terms of the handling of the complaint during its lifetime, you want to provide accurate information initially in the scope of the complaint and manage people's expectations about what you can and cannot deliver, so what they can expect from the process and the outcomes. And then keep people updated all the way along in a timely way and communicate effectively with them. In terms of the investigation, it's obviously important that that's fair and thorough, and wherever possible to ensure objectivity, you really want somebody not involved in the events complained about carrying out that investigation. And then once you've done that and you've reached a decision, be open about that, be clear about what you've decided, and set out the learning in detail and what your organisation intends to do as a result. And clearly, if having done all of those things you're unable to resolve the complaint, then the appropriate thing would be to refer on to us and give people that up to us. That brings us to the end of the slides.
We are going to hand back over chairing, and then we're happy to take any questions. I'm just going to do this, if you bear with us.
So I'm Suzanne Courtney, the CO3 Webinars Manager. The questions that we've just had are really with regards to sharing of the content today. So we will share the slides with everyone in due course. All that really leaves for me to do is to say a thank you to Priya Warner and Catherine Orr, and an extended thanks to Fundraising Regulator, along with Johnny, who's our technical support this evening. Thank you again to all our CO3 members who have attended tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and found it as beneficial as we have here in the CO3 offices. And finally, if I can direct you to our website for our next event on the 13th of November, and that's the evolving role of the Charity Commission and its interaction with other regulators. So thanks again, and I think that's us for this evening. Thank you.